Alright, check this giant hobo beard I've got going on now. Awful. So there are no rules to this that I'm always talking about. So I'm never talking about in regards to awakening, non-duality. I'm never talking about ultimately something that can be defined in objective terms. It sounds quite paradoxical that if I was to say to you that what I'm talking about isn't something that can be described, it's not something I can speak, yet I'm still speaking about it. Yeah, a lot of people get confused by this. You know, it's easy to get confused by this. And I'm talking about something that is beyond the reach of language, that is essentially completely paradoxical from any subjective point of view. So it can't be known or comprehended as an objective quality or an objective thing, an objective experience. What I'm talking about is too free, too unlimited, too total, too non-dual to be captured by language. You know, you hear this in many different traditions from many different speakers. So it's easy to get confused by this, but what gives rise to that confusion is a fixation in the conceptual version of what the mind thinks awakening is. So to kind of clarify this, I think it's important to say that anything that I say in regards to awakening, I'm not talking about something that I understand from an individual or personal point of view. I'm not talking about an objective thing called awakening. I'm not talking about something conceptual, although I'm using concepts, language to talk about it. It's just getting confusing yet. And what I'm talking about is not something that I know personally, or it's not something that I know objectively or logically or cognitively, because this is beyond the reach of the mind. It can't be defined in words. So anything that I say, or anything that I can talk to you about, or anything you can talk to me, anything you can say to me, anything I can say to you, is a description of my experience across the board. It's not a description of an objective reality that exists independently out with my experience, separate from my experience. I'm giving a description of my experience, and in that, this non-dual speaking style isn't limited by conceptuality. It's not limited by in that I'm not talking about an objective reality. I'm not talking about something with concrete objective qualities. I'm talking about the nature of experience itself. So in that, the language that I use isn't limited. It's completely free, because it doesn't mean anything. It has no implication in the objective sense. It means nothing. The whole point of this is I'm describing in various objective or conceptual language, talking from my experience, describing my experience. And if whoever is listening is inclined to hear what I'm pointing to at that level, then there can be a resonance there. If there's a fixation or a belief that I'm talking about something objective, an objective reality, it'll just not make any sense. It'll get confusing and it'll just be nonsense, really. So I like the way I talk is this non-dual speaking style is completely nonsensical from a logical perspective. It's completely contradictory, paradoxical, doesn't make sense. But that's okay. Again, because I'm not trying to define an objective reality. So in this relative objective experience, there are these conventions, these constructions, these relative constructions, and they suggest an actually inherently existing objective world, distinct from our experience and the person experiencing. And that objective reality crosses over. So all the commonly held conventions were with this shared collusion of belief and narrative. It allows me to say things like, I see a grey car over there, and then you see a grey car. Now I'm going to try and point to what's actually happening, right? And again, this isn't me describing a way it is an objective reality. This is a description of experience. And you can see this for yourself if you're inclined to investigate directly right now. So if I was to say to you, in this car park I can see a purple dinosaur. There's no purple dinosaur there, but I see a purple dinosaur. So I've just described to you a thought experience, an imagination experience of me experiencing a thought, or there being a thought, imagination of a purple dinosaur. So there's no sensory reference point for that, that's purely imagination. So if I say there's a grey Volkswagen over there, there is the sense experience that I'm referring to. That thought points to, but I'm still describing a thought experience. That thought experience being the grey Volkswagen over there. The grey Volkswagen is a thought. It's a thought, it's a mental designation. But what that mental designation, that concept points to, is an aspect of the visual experience. What that actually is, the visual experience, what that actually is, I can't describe. I can't describe it. It's not possible. But I can point attention to it by using these conventions, these constructs, and I do that by describing my own experience. See, so that's what this whole thing is. I'm not pointing to an objective reality. I'm using the conventions and the dualistic framework of language in the objective sense to direct attention in a way that clarifies not just an aspect of experience, but experience in its totality. So if I was to describe to you, so if I was to say whatever's in front of you, say you have a grey Volkswagen in front of you, if I was to say, describe to me that grey Volkswagen, you would use a bunch of relative concepts, a bunch of kind of symbolic designations in mind to describe that to me, or I could describe it to you, and in your experience you could formulate a thought experience that represents that in some way. If I was to say to you, describe the complete non-separated totality of all of your experience right now, of course you can't describe that. It's not possible. So, but there's a way to point to it if whoever's listening is inclined to hear that way, is inclined to let go of what seems to be standing in the way of whatever I'm talking about clarifying. But that's down to how you're going to hear it. And if you're at a point where you're ready to let go of the conceptual side of this. So it's very interesting. It's actually really enjoyable. I talk to people about this all the time, and there's like this back and forth in language, and it's like delicately pointing around the conceptual to that an experience which is not conceptual, which can be clearly realized, recognized directly, but can't be comprehended from any sort of subjective position as an objective experience. But there's this kind of like dance. It's like mind dancing with itself, thought dancing with itself in this back and forth. And in that there appears like this repetitive aspect. Spitting over this repetitive aspect, and it's just a tendency to habitually frame this in a conceptual sense, and attempt to understand it as some sort of objective quality from a personal subjective experience. And it's very much so happens in mind. So this is pretty much the first big obstruction, the first awakening, the first shift in identity, this conceptual thing, and the kind of consistent movement away from experience directly, the alluring, or the importance of having a mental focus on something that's not your own experience doesn't really go away, or didn't for me, until the initial awakening, when that non-conceptual aspect of experience started to clarify, and the identity it took a hit, something changed. What's standing in the way of that is, I talk about this all the time, it's this function in mind, this subject-object function in mind, and its fuel, its focus is on a conceptual objective reality. That there is an objective reality with its own inherent existence that exists independently out with my experience, and my experience is shining out onto it, or something like that. And it's such a powerful illusion, like it's so, and it's frightening to let that go, because you're letting go into the unknown, you're letting go into something that is unfamiliar from that position. But without that position, it's the most natural and familiar thing that there is. And it doesn't exclude the objective reality, it doesn't exclude the illusion, or thought, or self. It doesn't exclude anything. It's too free for that. It's too unlimited. There's no separation in it. There's no this or that. There's no right or wrong. There's no rules. There's no... language isn't designed for this. So that's why this pointing style is only really starts to come into its own and become powerful when there is that recognition of what's being pointed to in experience directly, such that becomes the point of interest and inquiry, not a designation or a description. So the descriptions and the designations and the terminology don't matter anymore. They're just tools that come and go. There's no heavy importance in them. What is important is what's here right now, which is obvious. It's obvious, and even the words, the thoughts and stuff that give rise to the separated out objective reality are made of it, aren't excluded by it. It's so total, it's so complete, it's so free. And then there's a signature of this fixation in the objective that can be recognised when it comes up. And in a sense, so to speak, you get outside it. And when you get outside it, poor description, you see it for what it is, and then it becomes obvious. And then you start to see it everywhere. You start to see it constantly. And also it becomes very easy to see it, let's say, in someone else. Because you're not, it's not like you see it in someone else, it's like that function becomes like apparent. So when the function is there, it's obvious. And it has nothing to do with a person. Or it has nothing to do with it being comprehended from a personal position. That's what's so weird about it. It's just that function becomes obvious. And then what that function's made of and what's not that function, it becomes clear, and things get so simple, too simple. So essentially what I'm always doing is in this channel is pointing out the obstructions, pointing out the fixations that seem to obscure the clear, ongoingly infinite experiential recognition of what I'm talking about, which is here already. It's already here. There's something being added to it in this subject-object function that seems to be obscuring it. When you see what that is, it no longer has any power, but you don't see it as that. It's so paradoxical. So I can point to the obstructions, just like I said about the car. So and then pointing past the designation of car, the thought experience that I'm describing to you that says that's a car, and it is distinct, separate, has its own existence apart from the totality of experience or the visual field. And then what's not that car, which is the scene, which you can't describe. But I can point you all the way up to the point where you can see the augmentation that makes that look like it's a separate car with its own inherent existence. And then once you see that, you can also see past the designation car, grey, size, shape, dimension, distance, separateness. And then you see it, and then there's a recognition of what this always is, which isn't a way, isn't this or that, isn't describable. That's what I'm always pointing to. And it's not a concept, it's not conceptual. So there's like, it's interesting how it's almost like this pattern of psyche that is common across multiple personalities, multiple people. It's very repetitive, and it does the same thing consistently, be it with like different language or a different object or a seeming different person, right? But the function is just a function, and when you see it, when you recognize it, so to speak, you start to see the function, and it's the same thing that just keeps coming up. So like I talk to people all the time, and they'll use different language and stuff, but the display of that, the strong belief in that function is just the same thing, and I'm always pointing to that. So it'll be things like the very strong version of this will be like, of a fixation, the conceptual, it'll be like non-duality itself is just also another concept. So the non-duality teachers are believing in a concept when they're deluding themselves or something like that, right? But that misses the point completely. It gets to the point where it's just like, but that's not a concept, but that's not a concept, but that's not a and then it just goes around in circles, and it trapped in this conceptual loop. What I'm talking about is outside all of that. It doesn't exclude it, but it's outside. It's not even in the same dimension. It's not even in the same realm. It's like completely free of that. Completely free of having to point at something and relate to it and label it and say, this means this means that. Like, by definition, even logically, that's not non-duality. That's just concepts. But what's at the core of that, right? This is the important part. What's at the heart of that delusion, right? That fixation on the conceptual. What makes it very difficult to spot that when you're in it is this subject-object function of me relating to something or me understanding something, such that the object of interest becomes so important that all of the attention is absorbed into that, and we look past this function consistently. Looking out from it, looking past it. Whereas it's way more simple than that. It's way more simple. It's like what all of that is made from, or it's like what's experiencing all of that without having to be a thing. You know, it's you can see, like, those of you who know what I'm talking about, you can see how difficult it is to point past this obstruction, right? And sometimes it's not it's not like there's a causal link between a non-dual teaching or a non-dual pointing and then seeing past this obstruction. It's not like there's a causal link between me talking about this on here and people listening to it and waking up causally due to that. That's not what's happening. That's like a model of separateness, or a model of inherent personality or selfness. What's happening is the thought functions that give rise to this experience of separateness are losing their reality, and they lose their reality as a non-dual unified whatever this is. And it has nothing to do with a teaching being effective, or it's more to do with just, is it gonna clarify or not, simply. And that's down to experience itself. That's why I always say that whenever you listen to a non-dual teaching or speaking, it's not, when you listen to it as someone listening to something of value, you're kind of missing it. When you listen to yourself as the one speaking, without those limits of separation, then things can clarify rapidly. So if you're listening to me now, then listen to this as you talking to yourself, not a person trying to get a point across. I've said this frequently. That's a misperception. If we're really interested in this, that's a misperception. So what's more simple? What's the most simple? What's so simple that we don't have to move at all to comprehend? What's already understood? What doesn't need to be known? Because it is knowing. What's already here? And what are we adding to that to make it seem elusive or unattainable? It's so simple, so simple. Anyway, that'll need to do it for now, but I'll talk to you next time.